You're currently the RPD, the Residency Program Director for your PGY1 residency. Why put time into doing residency programs?
Well, you know, it was something that probably Mark Woods instilled in me. We didn't have a residency program when I was in Kansas City at St. Luke's, but he always talked about, you know, wanting to do one. He had completed a residency and really saw the value of that. Certainly when I came to United Hospital, they had been having a residency program there since, you know, I think the 80s. And so it just, again, it was one of those things, well, this seems like the right thing to do. And it's been extremely satisfying to me. I assumed the RPD role when the previous one left, and I kept that actually as when I moved into the director position. And it becomes actually a pipeline for us. It's really, it's not just a way to help develop people. My unofficial goal of our residency program, you have your official goals that are on the flyer, but the unofficial one that I have that I tell people is that we would develop pharmacists that we would unhesitantly hire to work here at United Hospital. And so they don't just have to have the clinical skills. That's what a lot of folks go into the residency program thinking they're going to continue to grow and develop that. I really want us to focus on, you know, the attitude that they have and their awareness of how to work with nurses and physicians and other disciplines. And I think we can really impart that. I think we have an excellent model for them to see that at United Hospital. And like I said, that also is our major pipeline for a lot of the folks that we hire. Now it's even stepping back. Now a lot of our interns are applying for our residency program, so we really have to be thoughtful all the way down to which students we hire, because eventually that might be our workforce that we have at United.
So how do you help your residents grow beyond just accumulating more clinical knowledge?
I think you know, we have a lot of different activities. We have a fairly heavy leadership and practice management focus at United Hospital. They work with me and the other clinical managers or ops managers. What we do is we don't have just a 5-week rotation. We actually do 2 weeks at a time, spread that out throughout the course of the year so that it's a little bit more longitudinal. They're key members of our Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee, our Nursing Pharmacy Committee. We have conversations with them about hot topics in pharmacy. And probably the best thing that I do is the spontaneous conversations I have with them during, you know, their time that they spend with me. And we also go through Covey's book, the 7 Habits. And it's fun just to, every year is so different when we go through that. And I learn something, even though I'm probably on my 5th or 6th iteration of going through the book now. So those are the things that we do, and it really helps them to get, hopefully, a broader picture. And the thing that's a testimony to me on that is oftentimes at the end of the year, they will tell me that, you know, I wasn't so sure about the practice management section, but that's really something that I enjoyed a great deal, and it was a lot more positive experience than I ever would have anticipated it to be.
In Minnesota, you've been both the local and state chapter presidents. You've also been honored by receiving the Hallie Bruce Memorial Award and the Hugh Cabot Award. What were the messages that you had in your acceptance speeches for these awards?
The Hallie Bruce Award had an acceptance speech, and that was really an honor, because that's really considered the highest honor for health system pharmacy in Minnesota. And so I was really humbled, you know, to receive that. And it was the first time I had to give that type of, you know, presentation. I sometimes did it, you know, informally, you know, sitting and talking to someone. But, you know, my key message that I, you know, wanted to present for the Hallie Bruce was that, you know, think about where we've come from, but we have a lot to go forward. And what we need to move forward, and I've kind of touched on them already, but a key thing is we need to be accountable. We need to be present 24/7. We need to take the good and the bad, and we need to really be able to demonstrate and document our outcomes and the value that we provide. We can't complain about it. We have to. It's hard, but we have to figure out how to do that. The second one was collaboration, and you know, I've certainly had my experiences over the years where maybe I assumed something, why a nurse did something, this or that, and you know, the insight I gained when we actually went through maybe a root cause analysis or something, why that error occurred, and it's like, oh my, that's not what I thought at all. And so collaboration is essential. Team-based care is going to be really critical, I think, for the success of healthcare in general, but particularly pharmacy. And then finally, excellence in your practice. You have to be evidence-based in what you do. You have to understand how to use quality improvement techniques and measures, and you have to know how to use the data and share it. You need to, like I want to say, go toe-to-toe with a doc, but it's a friendly sparring is what I like to say. One of the things that troubles me the most is when I have a pharmacist, or probably more so a resident or a student, say, well, and I say, well, what do you think this article is telling you to do? Well, when Dr. So-and-so talks about it, he thinks it says this. And I'm like, that's good. What do you think? And people need to have that comfortable nature with knowing what the tools of the trade is, and I think that's the literature.
Recently, you've served on the ASHP Board of Directors. What's the responsibility of a Board of Directors?
Well, you know, the Board of Directors, it really is one of governance over ASHP. We are really there to ensure that the 40,000 plus members of ASHP are being served appropriately. What are their needs, and is ASHP as an organization meeting them? I think a lot of people don't realize that there is this 100 plus members of staff and a whole leadership structure to actually run ASHP. The Board of Directors doesn't do that. Paul Abramowitz, and prior to him Henry Manasseh, and their leadership team, they're the ones who run the day in, day out workings of ASHP. And what we as a Board of Directors really do is, I think we set direction, and we monitor the strategic initiatives. On my time on the board, I was really fortunate in that I was privy to the selection of a new executive vice president. Only the third one or fourth one that we had in the ASHP history. Now, there was a tremendous amount of work that was done by a selection committee before the final three candidates got to the board. But, the responsibility of ensuring that we had the right person at the lead for ASHP was, I know, a very heavy burden on all of us, and it was a wonderful experience. During that time, we had to talk about where do we want ASHP to go? We had to look down the road. What should be our foreign influence? ASHP is very well respected around the world. It's very much a globally recognized organization. Is that where we need to continue pushing there, or do we need to do more local? What about how much resources we should spend on advocacy efforts? And I don't mean just grassroots advocacy for pharmacy, but what about people going down to the Hill and advocating and working with our legislators? And so that's really where the Board of Directors really was very focused. You had to take off I was a director there, and my paying job was also a director, but very different jobs, and you can't get into the weeds so much when you're at the board table. And we all tend to want to problem solve because that's what we do every day, but that's really not what the Board of Directors. We have an excellent group of staff that really help and decide how we get things done. What our job is to say, this is where we think we need to go.
So how do individual members influence the policy development process of ASHP?
Well, I think there's several different elements. I mean, Sarah, you should be answering this question because you're just, going to deliver, I think, your final report on the organizational task force, and that was one of your key initiatives, was how do we make sure we have a good and fresh process. Certainly there's the formal approach, for the policy process. So we have our councils, and, a lot of rigor goes into developing policy statements there. Our other component groups, the sections and forums, can also do that. These are all vetted through the House of Delegates. Resolutions can be placed on the House floor. And so there's that formal process, and these policies then are vetted, by the House of Delegates. They're finalized by the board, and then they go into policy, and this is what really drives ASHP staffers when they get asked questions or have to establish, what is the opinion of ASHP, they go to those policy processes. I think there's other ways, though, that 40,000 members can't participate on those component groups. The state affiliates and local affiliates, I think that is really, you get grassroots level, and that's how issues and concerns can funnel up through that. And I think we need to really continue to advance and enhance that. And also sometimes there's town hall meetings at ASHP meetings where people can vet. Certainly the residency preceptors have a wonderful opportunity to participate in that. So I think there's always ways that people can really get their concerns expressed if they choose to go down that path.
You're a fellow of ASHP. What is a fellow? What's the fellow status, and how does one become a fellow?
Well, being a fellow it's a recognition. Many organizations and areas have fellow status. I think probably the criteria by which you go forward to apply for it is different. For ASHP, I think you have to be practicing for almost 10 years. I think there is some element of duration there. And it's really looking at, what are your significant contributions? Are you really focused on health system pharmacy, and what have you done through ASHP to contribute to that? And so it's actually, there's sort of two inputs into that. One is you have to fill out, and do a sort of a bio and do some self-assessment of, answer some questions, do I really meet the mark here? But then you also identify several other individuals that can attest to your contributions. So you call on former students and residents and colleagues and mentors to help you do that. And then that information, I think, goes to a group that go through a scoring system, and they say yes or no to this. So it's really it's a good feeling when you're recognized by your peers. I think that yes, I have made contributions, and it's a nice thing to have.
And many organizations have a fellow type program, correct, outside
Yes.
of pharmacy?
There's right. There's certainly the major pharmacy organizations, but I think also certainly medicine has them. Some executive societies, nursing societies, they have fellow status.
You recently completed a master's degree, having completed the year-long Pharmacy Leadership Academy. Why do so mid-career?
Well, Sarah, you and I talked about that a great deal. Actually, after especially moving up to from Kansas City to United Hospital, and I was in the clinical manager role, I started kind of looking around. And, when I graduated back in the mid-'80s, my PharmD was, really considered a graduate level degree. But, now the PharmD degree had turned into an entry-level degree. So that really wasn't a distinguishing mark for you, especially in a leadership position. And a lot of folks that were going into leadership, if they may have completed an administrative residency with a master's program or gotten their MBA or MHA. And certainly I knew in the nursing ranks there was starting to be more and more requirement. If you think about magnet status, you have to have your leaderships having a master's degree. And so I really started to think about that and saying, if I want to keep moving on here, I think I need to think about this. Now, I went and looked several times. Things happen, kind of expensive, maybe time commitments. So I wasn't getting that done. So when the PLA first became available, and the timing on that was perfect. The first PLA class, which I participated in, was launched right after I became director of pharmacy. And so, every time you move up one rank, you think you're ready to go, and then all of a sudden you realize, wow, this is a lot harder than I thought it was. And so the PLA was perfect timing. I think I became interim director in March, named director in June, and I think we started the PLA maybe in July. I can't quite, or no, I guess it was the following January. And so that was pretty special to me, because it was virtually the who's who of pharmacy that was teaching this. And it did, in addition to just honing some skills, it also helped me to develop a lot of confidence that what I was doing, I was on the mark. And so it helped me enhance my confidence and refine some of the skills and techniques that I had. And it really, and I remember talking to you about it, saying, well, I should get graduate level credit for this. This is better than a master's degree, although, I don't hang initials out behind my name. So then when the MHA program, was through the work of the foundation, and you could apply the PLA credits for it, I really wasn't sure again, though I wanted to do it. And because I was on the board of directors for ASHP, work was busy, I had some personal things going on, and I'm like, do I really have time to do this? But the gentleman who was doing a pretty good job of recruiting said, you're never going to be any less busy. And I said, you're probably right. So I actually signed up on that phone call, and the rest is history. The MHA has really been awesome. I think it really has given me the skill set again to really hone some skills and get a broader perspective outside of pharmacy. Especially this time, this was taught by faculty that weren't pharmacists. And so really, actually what to put together in a business case so it's not so pharmacy-centric, that it makes sense to my CEO or my CFO. That is really what I gained through the MHA program. So yeah, I'm a little bit further along than some folks do when they take their masters or something of that nature, but I guess I'm always on a lifelong learning quest. And again, I need that structure. I wouldn't have gotten this if I didn't have, okay, you've got to have this done by Sunday at midnight, and I managed to get through it okay.
So with both the PLA and then your master's program, did you have to travel for those? How were the programs structured, I guess?
Well, that's really what made it possible for me to do it. And as I had alluded to, some of the master's programs that I was looking at in the Twin Cities area, they were arranged so for the working professional. They might have been weekend programs or something of that nature, but as I mentioned, I was having to travel down to Iowa to help care for my parents on the weekend, so a weekend program wasn't too helpful for me. And how the PLA and the MHA through Simmons, through the foundation, was structured was online learning. And I'll be honest, I wasn't so sure about that. Because to me, I'm really big into relationship building and the face-to-face, and I remember that was some of the best learning I had when I was in school. So how in the world could you learn through just these threaded discussions, which I wasn't quite sure what those even were. I was not technologically advanced, I guess. But I was, quite wrong in that. And even from the PLA, when I went first class of us that went through, and the PLA to what Simmons had online, you really could get in engaging conversations. And I was pretty impressed, and sometimes actually the journaling and having to be thoughtful on what you had to do versus you were forced to be called into action. You couldn't sit quietly in a corner. If you had to do so many posts, you had to do so many posts, and you couldn't get by with a snoozer one week or anything like that. So I think it really was that online learning, and there was a tremendous richness to that. And also you had people from around the country. I worked with some really awesome pharmacists on this, and it was a very good experience for me.
So you got some credit towards your master's program by completing the Pharmacy Leadership Academy, correct?
Yes, I did. Had to actually, I think, because it was, after we had completed it, we did, I think, 2 8-week capstone courses to make sure that we had all those requirements. But I think it was 28 graduate credits went towards the master's degree. So that was really, really a very good deal.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is going to change in the next 10 years that's going to impact practice?
Lots. You hear about the speed of change and how it continues to just accelerate beyond control. So it's hard to know exactly, because if I think back 10 years ago what we were doing, I probably wouldn't have dreamed that we would be doing this. I think that automation is going to continue to have a huge role in technology. And I think that pharmacy is going to have to stay out in front of that. Some of the things that I sort of call the hit me in your face interventions, be it dosing and IV to PO or allergies, I think we'll find algorithms that will manage that. Pharmacy isn't going to have to intervene or oversee that, and it might be completely automated. The CPO systems, they have a lot to be desired yet, but I think we'll continue to hone that. And so I really think pharmacy practice we have to get closer to the patient. It's going to be a long time before that is completely automated. And so the interactions, even we think about everything we're doing with MedRec and having to get that good medication list and talking to the patient, or then counseling them, helping them to make sure that they take their meds appropriately on the outside. The face-to-face with physicians and nurses. Pharmacogenomics, I think will have a play. I think we're all struggling. Is that just going to be at the academic medical centers? Will that be everywhere? Where will your small rural hospitals have to deal with that? I don't know, but obviously I think that's also the next kinetics. I think kinetics is kind of getting sunsetted, and so pharmacy has to understand what that all is about. Whether or not we'll actually run the tests at all the sites is another question, but the application of that information, we're going to have to stay on top of that.
So how do you try to do that as the leader, and then how do you try to help your staff?
Well, sometimes, you always have a group of staff that's somewhere way out there ahead of you, and there's what you're kind of pulling along. So, for me, what I'm constantly saying to our staff is, we really have to measure our value and our quality. And because that is, people know, in the past probably 2 years, I've been talked to more about the cost of a pharmacist than I have in the previous 20 years I was in practice. So clearly the value proposition is something that we have to do, and that's something that a lot of staff pharmacists they struggle with. That's not really why they're doing what they love to do. That's someone else's job in some respects, but I always ask them, I need your help to tell me these stories. And also, let's figure out what is the biggest value for us. We do a lot of very good things. How do we prioritize our time? So that's what we're doing. We're working on prioritization tools and more efficient documentation systems and things of that nature to help put all those tools in place for us.
So do you have any specific examples of things that are working, or are you still in the developmental phase?
Well, with our CPOE system, even I think some of the things that our EMR has done. One of the examples that I often tell people the impact that has had, and I think that's going to continue to evolve, is, we had a computer system that we entered orders in, but you had the paper copies. Well, just to keep up with that, you never, you shouldn't, enter an order that really looked inappropriate or really, really bad. But there were things that you would enter to get them going, and then you would check on it later. Now our pharmacists, we really have them, they're evaluating those orders in advance. They're not getting verified until they know what the indications are. So we've already shifted things a lot more prospectively just on that process of things. We've developed a prioritization tool that we just launched within the last couple of months that really it's a scoring tool. I mean, other folks have used it. We have an Epic product, and other people have done something similar to that. We've tailored it to be specific to the Alina goals and objectives and things of that nature. So we're hoping that will help people to prioritize their time. I still expect 100% review of all their patients, but okay, yeah, you can spend more time on the top 25%, and maybe the bottom 25% you can get through them a lot more quickly. So those are some of the things that we're doing. We're really focusing a lot on MedRec in our organization right now. We're a little behind, I feel, on some, but really identifying how do we get that movement up front, and again, it's that patient contact.
So what's next for you career-wise?
Well, it's always interesting because I've always shuddered a little bit when people have asked me that question starting back in pharmacy school. I'll be honest, I've never been one to have a 5 and a 10-year goal, so maybe I shouldn't be saying that on tape. But what I try to do is take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves. I feel like there's a lot that I still want to accomplish as a director of pharmacy at United Hospital, and I always try to keep advancing. Even if I'm in the same position, I want to be doing something different. I've always had a philosophy. If I look back and I'm doing the same thing today that I was doing 2 years ago, I'm not doing something right. And so that's really what I think, really trying to continue to advance our pharmacy services, seeing what we can do in procedural areas, in the clinics, and continuing to really develop that rapport that we have in those areas.
What do you think the keys have been to your success?
Well, I think I've been pretty fortuitous in that I've made some good choices. Maybe I didn't realize them at the time. And as I reflect back, and part of this was by design, some of it was by just good fortune, is it's very important that you surround yourself with good people. I think back to the days at the University of Iowa. Dennis Helling was the head of the clinical department, and certainly he and several, Barry Carter and others that were at Iowa, were real leaders and innovators in launching clinical pharmacy and trying to drive that. Going down to Kansas City, Mark Woods, Dave Goff, that's where I met you, Sarah, Harold Godwin. Again, you start to see what people like that, what you were able to do. Moving up to Kansas City, to St. Paul, Bruce Scott and many others, and then getting on the board of directors and going through ASHP. So it really is to make wise choices. You do really you are influenced heavily by those you surround yourself with. So I think that has been a real key. And also, I don't settle very easily, and I'm not a huge adventuresome person. I mean, I didn't leave the Midwest. I didn't go out to either coast or anything like that, but for a small farm girl from Iowa, I did venture into the big city because I knew that's what I needed to do. I wanted to position myself in organizations that were going in the right direction. It wasn't just a job to me. It was really, I had a career path, and that's how I think I selected the places that I went to.
What additional advice would you have for young practitioners today?
Well, I think, again, identify who you think are mentors and, kind of hitch yourself to that wagon and, really emulate them and get ideas from them. But I also think you have to understand that pharmacy is a very small world, and it's extremely critical. Don't burn any bridges. Even at my stage of my game, I don't want to burn bridges. Pharmacy, someone I just talked to said, everyone's just 1 degree of freedom removed, right? And so I think it's really critical to understand that, and also look for the opportunity. There's opportunities just about in every situation. Don't play the victim role. So even if that first job isn't your ideal job, see what you can do to make yourself valuable to that job. If you're a resident trained individual and this was the job you take and they don't have a lot of clinical services, sell what you can do to them. And I think that is really critical. There's opportunities out there. One of the opportunities I had, over the years is when the opportunity to become the director came up, that was the year I just gotten into the MSHP, the Minnesota Society, the presidency year. Well, that wasn't exactly the two things that I wanted to, launch into at the same time, but you had to do that. Now, did I do quite as well on either one that I had maybe been able to do if I was only doing one or the other? But the opportunity wasn't going to present itself again for those two things, and so I tried to take advantage of that.
So when you were in pharmacy school, how many women in your class?
I don't remember the specific number, but what I do remember is that we were the first class at the University of Iowa that were 50-50. And I think it's probably been more women, every year since then. So that was we were sort of that landmark class, I think, that finally, yes, it's pretty split evenly. So I don't recall exactly how many, but it was 50-50.
So as a woman, do you feel you've been discriminated against in pharmacy at all?
I have to say I've been fortunate. I think there's been folks that have broken down those barriers in front of me, and I can't say that I ever really felt that way. Sometimes we joke, about this or that, but no, I can't say that I've ever felt that way, and I've never even really let myself go down that path. I think that's something that I would encourage. Some folks look for reasons, and I actually had a good friend of mine say that it's sometimes people use the gender issue. Some people might, race or religion. Especially when I was going through school, I don't have a PharmD, I can't do that. So you have to be very careful not to put up excuses. Just work through those and don't look for the excuses, just try and work around them.
My final question, you've spoken internationally. How did it feel to speak in the Forbidden City in China?
Well, what a great opportunity. I was actually representing ASHP. I was on the board, and they had wanted someone to talk about the PPMI. And so, here I was in Beijing, talking to folks that, everyone through translator. So that in its own right is an interesting experience. And I think, that experience, and especially because, we were able to go and tour one of the hospitals and talk to some of the members at the meeting. I remember distinctly, going through some of the recommendations of PPMI, and I think I'm probably going to paraphrase here a little bit, but one of them is that, really all ambulatory patients deserve, the review of a pharmacist. And, and so I'm going through all these things, and, during the question and answer section, one of the guys raised his hand, and he goes, well, in China, we have, thousands of patients per pharmacist that come in, and how could, there's no way that we can do that. So how do we do this? And, I think after saying, we talked about you have to prioritize, maybe, high risk medications, but it really, I think it drove again just the impact and the advanced systems that we have in hospital pharmacy particularly. And, I had people coming up to me and saying, well, how do we want to have a USP 797 IV room. Tell us how we go about doing that. They were very eager in China to advance their systems, and it was interesting because they had, some of the things we toured where it was kind of surprising, seeing the traditional medicine and some of the things they were doing with that. So it was a very eye-opening experience, and really telling me to feel fortunate. We shouldn't be complaining about the lack of resources in our organizations, because they were really trying to push forward with a lot less.
Lisa, this has been great. I really appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I've really enjoyed this.